Secrets Beneath the Earth. A journey through the world's most ancient civilizations. Settle back and let your mind drift, for tonight we venture into the quiet spaces where history sleeps. Beneath your feet, as you rest in the comfort of the present, lies a world far older and more extraordinary than textbooks ever dared to whisper. For too long, we've been told a simple story, that civilization began in distant lands across ancient seas, that the Americas were empty stages waiting for their first actors. But the Earth remembers differently. In the gentle darkness of this evening, imagine the soft whisper of wind across forgotten mounds, the patient glow of starlight on stone observatories that tracked celestial rhythms thousands of years before Stonehenge rose from English soil. Picture vast networks of canals threading through desert landscapes, engineered with such precision that modern cities still follow their ancient paths. Tonight we'll walk through shadows cast by civilizations that flourished when much of the world was wrapped in ice and silence. We'll discover skywatchers who built their temples as cosmic calendars, traders who moved precious metals across continental distances, and engineers who transformed impossible landscapes into gardens of abundance. Close your eyes and let these ancient voices guide you into sleep, where the deepest truths of human story await your dreaming mind. For generations, the story we were told seemed so beautifully simple, so elegantly contained. Picture it. 13,000 years ago, as the last ice age loosened its grip on the world, brave hunters crossed a narrow land bridge from Siberia into an empty continent. They carried with them stone-tipped spears and an unquenchable hunger for mammoth herds, leaving behind only scattered points of flaked stone that archaeologists would later name after a small town in New Mexico, Clovis. This was the Clovis first model, and for most of the 20th century it ruled American archaeology with the quiet authority of established truth. Textbooks proclaimed it, professors taught it, and museum displays illustrated it with confident precision. The Americas, we learned, were humanity's final frontier, discovered, settled, and civilized in one neat chronological package that fit comfortably within our understanding of how civilization spread across the globe. But beneath the soil of the Americas, something restless had been waiting. In laboratories where radiocarbon dates were calculated, in the careful hands of excavators working through layers of ancient sediment, in the patient analysis of bones and stones and fragments of forgotten lives, evidence began to whisper of a different story entirely. A story that would challenge everything we thought we knew about when humans first set foot on this continent, and how long they had been quietly building their worlds here. The resistance was fierce and immediate. Established scholars, their reputations built upon the solid foundation of Clovis first, found themselves defending not just a theory, but an entire worldview. How could nomadic hunters have possessed the maritime skills necessary to reach coastal sites thousands of years before the supposed ice-free corridor even opened? Where were the intermediate sites that should mark their passage? And if humans had been in the Americas for so long, why had it taken until now to find convincing evidence? Yet as the years passed and technology advanced, the whispers grew louder. Ancient DNA extracted from sediment cores told stories of human presence in places and times that should have been empty. Underwater archaeologists, diving along coastlines now submerged beneath rising seas, found traces of campsites on terraces that had been dry land when ocean levels were lower. In Oregon's Paisley Caves, fossilized human corallites, preserved feces, provided undeniable genetic proof of human occupation dating back over 14,000 years. Each piece of evidence was scrutinized with the intensity reserved for revolutionary claims, and many were indeed found wanting. False alarms, contaminated samples, and wishful thinking littered the path of discovery. But slowly, methodically, a pattern began to emerge from the accumulating data. A pattern that suggested the Americas had been home to human ingenuity and adaptation for far longer than anyone had believed possible. The orthodox timeline was beginning to crumble, and with it, our fundamental understanding of humanity's relationship with this ancient continent. The transformation was as profound as it was unsettling. Where once there had been a single, clear narrative, one migration, one people, one moment of discovery. Now there emerged the possibility of multiple waves of settlement, each leaving only the faintest traces of their passage. Perhaps small groups of maritime peoples had followed kelp forests along the Pacific coast, exploiting rich marine ecosystems while the interior remained locked in ice. Perhaps others had found refuge in isolated pockets of ice-free land, surviving through the harshest periods of glaciation before emerging to populate a warming continent. The very definition of first began to blur as researchers grappled with evidence that seemed to push human presence deeper and deeper into the past. Were these early inhabitants the ancestors of later Native American populations, or did they represent entirely separate migrations that had been lost to time and genetics? The questions multiplied faster than the answers, each new discovery raising 10 more mysteries for everyone it resolved. As we stand at the threshold of this unfolding revelation, we find ourselves confronting a humbling truth: that the story of human arrival in the Americas is not a simple tale of discovery and settlement, but a complex web of migrations, adaptations, and survival strategies that may stretch back tens of thousands of years. And if this is true, then the routes these earliest Americans took to reach the continent become not just matters of academic interest, but windows into some of humanity's most extraordinary journeys. To understand how these earliest Americans reached the continent requires us to reimagine the world as it existed during the height of the last ice age, a planet so transformed by cold that it would seem alien to modern eyes. Imagine vast glacial sheets, some nearly 2 miles thick, stretching across much of what we now call Canada and the northern United States. The Laurentide and Cordilleran ice sheets formed an almost impenetrable barrier, a frozen wall that seemed to seal off the heart of the continent from any possibility of human passage. For decades, archaeologists believed that the only route south lay through a narrow corridor that occasionally opened between these massive glaciers, a frigid pathway that would have provided the sole avenue for Clovis hunters to enter the Americas. But as evidence of earlier human presence accumulated, this neat explanation began to unravel. Glacial geologists studying ancient pollen samples and meltwater patterns made a startling discovery. The ice-free corridor likely didn't open until after 13,000 years ago, too late to explain the earlier sites scattered across both continents. If the traditional overland route was blocked, then how had these phantom populations reached places like Monteverde in Chile or the Paisley Caves in Oregon? The answer, researchers began to realize, might lie not in the frozen interior, but along the edges of the continent itself, in pathways that had been hidden beneath the waves for thousands of years. The Pacific coast of the Americas during the Ice Age was a world unto itself, a narrow ribbon of ice-free refuge that stretched from what is now Japan, across the Aleutian Islands and down the western edge of both continents. Scientists call it the Kelp Highway hypothesis, and it paints a picture of early maritime peoples following this nutrient-rich ecological corridor, living off the abundance of marine life that thrived in the cold, productive waters. Imagine small groups of seafaring families, their boats carved from driftwood and sealed with rendered fat, navigating by the stars and the rhythms of tides. They would have found a landscape utterly unlike today's coastline. Kelp forests swaying beneath frigid waters, rich with fish and shellfish, supporting communities of seals and sea otters. Along rocky shores, they could have gathered mussels and sea urchins, hunted marine mammals, and found fresh water streaming down from glacial valleys. The elegance of this theory lies in its simplicity. No massive overland treks across frozen wastelands, no waiting for ice corridors to open. Instead, a gradual coastal migration spanning generations, each group moving a little farther south, following the familiar patterns of marine abundance. Some might have made landfall temporarily, establishing seasonal camps before returning to their boats. Others might have settled permanently in coastal refuges, their descendants eventually moving inland as the climate warmed. But the rising seas at the end of the Ice Age drowned most evidence of this ancient shoreline beneath hundreds of meters of water. Yet tantalizing clues survive, scattered like breadcrumbs across the submerged landscape. Beneath the waters of British Columbia, marine archaeologists have discovered traces of ancient campsites on terraces that were once dry land, their radiocarbon dates suggesting human presence older than the traditional timeline allows. These underwater excavations require remarkable skill and patience, divers working in frigid, murky water, carefully mapping sites that have been preserved beneath the sea for millennia. The challenge of coastal archaeology is immense. Most potential sites lie beneath hundreds of feet of water, accessible only to the most sophisticated underwater technology. Submersibles equipped with high-resolution sonar scan the seafloor for anomalies that might represent ancient hearths or tool caches. When promising features are found, teams of specialized divers descend to investigate, working in conditions that would challenge even the most experienced underwater archaeologists. But the Pacific coast wasn't the only possible route. New evidence suggests that some early populations might have survived in cryptic refugia, small pockets of ice-free land scattered across what we now call Alaska and western Canada. These isolated havens, rich in lichens, mosses, and grazing animals, could have supported small human populations through even the harshest periods of glaciation. Genetic studies of modern Native American populations hint at this possibility, revealing patterns of diversity that suggest multiple founding populations rather than a single migration event. Some lineages appear to have diverged from their Asian cousins much earlier than the traditional timeline would allow. The implications of these multiple migration routes are staggering. Rather than a single heroic journey across the Bering Land Bridge, we must now envision a complex tapestry of human movement. Coastal mariners island hopping along kelp-rich shores, small bands surviving in Ice Age refuges, perhaps even trans-Pacific voyagers, arriving from entirely different directions. Each group would have brought unique technologies, languages, and cultural traditions, creating a mosaic of early American societies far more diverse than previously imagined. Some researchers now propose that the genetic and archaeological evidence points to at least 3 separate waves of migration, each separated by thousands of years. The first might have been coastal peoples following the Pacific Rim during the height of glaciation. The second could have been the Clovis populations moving through the ice-free corridor as it finally opened. And there may have been others, populations whose genetic signatures have been diluted by time, or whose archaeological traces remain hidden beneath ice, water, or sediment. The mystery deepens when we consider how these early populations adapted to such dramatically different environments. From frigid coastal margins to isolated mountain valleys, from kelp forests to tundra refuges, each route would have demanded different survival strategies, different technologies, different ways of understanding and interacting with the natural world. And as these scattered groups gradually spread across the Americas, they began to encounter landscapes that would challenge every assumption about what early human societies could achieve. As these early populations spread across the Americas and began to establish themselves in diverse landscapes, something extraordinary began to emerge from the accumulated wisdom of generations. Far from the wandering hunter-gatherers of popular imagination, these ancient peoples were developing sophisticated understanding of their world. Not just how to survive in it, but how to transform it into something magnificent. Hidden today beneath dense woodland in Louisiana lies a quiet site that shatters every assumption about when complex civilization first appeared in North America. Watson Break consists of 11 low mounds connected by earthen ridges, forming an oval nearly 900 feet across. When archaeologists first excavated here in the 1980s, they expected to find evidence of familiar cultures, perhaps 2,000 years old. Instead, radiocarbon dating revealed something that seemed impossible. Watson Break was nearly 5,400 years old, built around 3,500 BCE. Let that sink in for a moment. This monumental earthwork was already ancient when the first stones of Stonehenge were being placed, older than the Egyptian pyramids, older than the first dynasties of Sumer. Yet its builders were supposedly simple hunter-gatherers, people without agriculture, without metal tools, without written language. How then had they possessed the social organization, the astronomical knowledge, and the engineering expertise to plan and construct such a sophisticated complex? The answer lies in a fundamental misunderstanding of what constitutes civilization itself. The arrangement of Watson-Brake's mounds reveals a sophisticated understanding of celestial mechanics that rivals anything achieved by the ancient world's most celebrated astronomers. The earthworks are precisely aligned to mark solstices and equinoxes, suggesting that their creators tracked the movements of the sun with mathematical precision. But this was no mere academic exercise. These alignments guided the rhythms of life itself, marking the optimal times for planting, harvesting, and conducting the sacred ceremonies that bound their communities together. What emerges from careful study of Watson-Brake is a picture of people who understood that architecture could be far more than shelter. They built not from stone, but from the living earth itself, creating monuments that were simultaneously practical, spiritual, and astronomical. Their engineering was organic, working with natural contours and seasonal flooding patterns, rather than imposing rigid geometric forms upon the landscape. This was architecture as dialogue with the cosmos, structures designed to capture and frame specific moments when earth and sky achieved perfect harmony. During the winter solstice, sunrise would align precisely with specific mounds, creating dramatic light effects that transformed the entire complex into a vast calendar written in earth and shadow. But Watson-Brake was merely the beginning. Farther north along the Mississippi, even more extraordinary earthen complexes began to emerge, each revealing new layers of sophistication in design, construction, and astronomical precision. These ancient architects were creating something unprecedented, cities built not of stone and mortar, but of patience, vision, and an intimate understanding of cosmic cycles. The most extraordinary of these ancient complexes is Poverty Point, also in Louisiana, constructed around 1700 BCE. This sprawling settlement consists of concentric semicircular ridges spanning nearly 3/4 of a mile, with several large platform mounds positioned at strategic points along its edges. At its height, Poverty Point may have supported thousands of inhabitants, a population density that challenges everything we thought we knew about pre-agricultural societies. What makes Poverty Point truly remarkable is not just its size, but the evidence it provides of vast trade networks that connected communities across thousands of miles. Archaeologists have uncovered copper from the Great Lakes region, soapstone from the Appalachian Mountains, and shells from the Gulf Coast. Materials that had traveled incredible distances to reach this remote Louisiana site. How had supposedly simple hunter-gatherers organized such extensive commerce? How had they coordinated the movement of goods across half a continent? The answer lies in understanding that Poverty Point was not merely a settlement, but a sophisticated ceremonial and economic center. Its inhabitants crafted intricate figurines, carved elaborate stone beads, and baked clay cooking balls used in communal feasts that may have drawn pilgrims from hundreds of miles away. The site's design reflects planning and ritual sophistication that archaeologists once believed impossible for its time period. The central mound, known as Mound A, rises 70 feet high and stretches nearly 700 feet long. When viewed from above, it forms the unmistakable shape of a bird. Geometry, symbolism, and sacred art fused into Earth itself. But perhaps the most haunting aspect of these earthen civilizations is their sudden disappearance. Around 1100 BCE, Poverty Point was mysteriously abandoned. The reasons remain lost to time. Climate fluctuations, changing river courses, resource depletion, or perhaps something more profound, a spiritual crisis that shattered the beliefs that had held these communities together for centuries. Yet their legacy endures in ways that continue to astound researchers. As archaeologists mapped these ancient sites using modern technology, a breathtaking pattern emerged, stretching across the entire continent. From Florida's shell rings to Ohio's Serpent Mound, from Midwest platform complexes to Gulf Coast geometric ridges, an intricate web of earthworks extended over thousands of miles. Each region had developed unique architectural styles, yet all shared a common fascination with celestial alignment, sacred geometry, and the transformation of landscape into cosmic calendar. These were not isolated experiments, but expressions of a continent-wide understanding that the Earth itself could embody cosmic order. While Egypt raised pyramids from limestone and Mesopotamia molded bricks from clay, America's early peoples shaped the very soil beneath their feet into enduring monuments. The difference was material, not meaning. Their architecture was no less deliberate, their purpose no less profound. But if these earthen architects had mastered the art of astronomical construction, they were not alone in their sophisticated understanding of natural resources. Far to the north, along the shores of the Great Lakes, another group of ancient engineers was pursuing an entirely different kind of mastery. While the earthen architects of the Mississippi Valley were creating their astronomical monuments, an entirely different kind of civilization was emerging along the shores of Lake Superior. Here, in the cold, granite-bound wilderness of what is now the northern Great Lakes region, ancient peoples were undertaking one of the most ambitious mining operations in human history. An enterprise so vast and sophisticated that it challenges everything we thought we knew about prehistoric technology and organization. For over 3,000 years, from roughly 4,000 to 1,000 BCE, the shores of Lake Superior rang with the sound of stone hammers striking copper-bearing rock. These were not casual prospectors searching for pretty trinkets, but skilled engineers who understood the unique properties of native copper. One of the few metals that can be worked without smelting, shaped and strengthened through patient cold hammering techniques that wouldn't be rediscovered in the old world for centuries. The scale of their operation defies comprehension. Across Isle Royale, Michigan's Upper Peninsula, and the rugged shores of northern Wisconsin and Minnesota, thousands of mining pits scar the landscape, some reaching depths of over 30 feet, others extending horizontally for hundreds of yards into solid bedrock. The miners used fire to heat the rock face, then doused it with cold water to create fractures, systematically extracting pure copper with a precision that speaks to generations of accumulated knowledge. But here's where the story becomes truly mysterious. Estimates suggest these ancient miners extracted over 500,000 tons of copper from the earth. Yet only a tiny fraction of that massive quantity has ever been found in archaeological contexts. Where did it all go? This is perhaps one of the greatest mysteries in American archaeology, the case of the missing copper that has puzzled researchers for over a century. What we do know is that artifacts made from Great Lakes copper have been discovered across an almost unimaginable geographic range. Small beads, fishhooks, and ceremonial blades crafted from this distinctive metal have turned up in burial mounds from the Gulf Coast to the Appalachian Mountains, from the Great Plains to the Atlantic seaboard. Chemical analysis can trace these objects back to their source with remarkable precision. The isotopic signature of Lake Superior copper is as unique as a fingerprint. This widespread distribution suggests something extraordinary. A trade network of continental scope operating thousands of years before the rise of complex civilizations in Mesoamerica. But this wasn't trade in the modern sense of commercial exchange. Archaeological evidence suggests it was something far more sophisticated, a form of ritual gift-giving that bound distant communities together through shared symbols and ceremonies. The copper itself was more than mere metal to these ancient peoples. Many indigenous traditions regard copper as sacred material, the flesh of the earth itself, shaped by thunder and lightning. Possessing copper objects wasn't about wealth or status in our modern understanding, but about maintaining spiritual connections to the cosmic forces that governed life and death, fertility and renewal. The mining sites themselves tell a story of remarkable engineering sophistication. At Isle Royale, a rugged island in the middle of Lake Superior, ancient pits still scar the granite cliffs where miners worked for generations. Thousands of hammerstones, carefully shaped granite tools weighing up to 40 pounds, litter the landscape around these excavations. Archaeological studies reveal that the miners developed specialized techniques for each type of copper deposit, adapting their methods to local geology with the precision of modern engineers. They understood that heating the rock face would make it more brittle, but they also knew exactly how much thermal shock the granite could withstand before shattering unpredictably. They developed systems for removing debris, for shoring up unstable walls, and for following copper veins deep into solid rock. Some of their excavations required the coordinated labor of dozens of workers over multiple seasons. Evidence of social organization that extends far beyond simple family groups. The question of labor organization leads to even deeper mysteries. How were these massive mining operations coordinated? Who decided where to dig, when to expand existing pits, or when to abandon depleted sites? The absence of obvious hierarchical burial sites or monumental architecture suggests these weren't centralized state operations, yet the scale and sophistication of the work implies planning and coordination across vast distances and extended time periods. Some researchers propose that the mining was seasonal, with groups gathering at productive sites during specific times of year before dispersing across the continent to distribute their precious cargo through established networks. By around 1000 BCE, the great mining operations fell silent. The reasons remain as mysterious as the fate of the missing copper itself. Climate change may have altered the ecosystems that supported these far-flung communities. Shifting trade routes might have made the arduous journey to Lake Superior less worthwhile. Or perhaps the social and spiritual systems that had sustained this continental network for 3 millennia simply evolved in new directions. What's certain is that the old copper complex, as archaeologists call it, represents one of humanity's earliest experiments in large-scale resource extraction and continental trade. These ancient miners and traders created something unprecedented. A network of exchange that connected communities across thousands of miles without the benefit of written language, domesticated animals, or centralized authority. The legacy of their work extends far beyond archaeology. Modern mining operations in the region have repeatedly discovered ancient tools lying beside contemporary equipment, as if separated by time alone. Some 19th-century miners kept these ancient hammers as talismans, recognizing the skill and determination of those who had walked the same rocky shores millennia before. But if the northern copper miners created networks of continental scope, they were not the only ancient Americans to achieve remarkable feats of organization and construction. Far to the south, along the fertile floodplains of the Mississippi River, another civilization was beginning to emerge, one that would surpass all previous achievements in scale, sophistication, and sheer monumental ambition. Around the year 1050 CE, near the confluence of the Mississippi and Missouri rivers, something extraordinary began to rise from the fertile floodplains of what is now Illinois. This was Cahokia, the largest and most complex urban settlement ever built north of Mexico, a city that at its height supported a population of perhaps 20,000 people, making it larger than London or Paris at the same time. But to call Cahokia merely a city understates its true significance. This was something unprecedented in the Americas. An entire landscape transformed into a massive astronomical instrument, a place where urban planning, scientific observation, and spiritual belief converged into a single, magnificent vision. The very ground beneath the inhabitants' feet had been reshaped into a cosmic calendar where every sunrise and sunset, every seasonal transition, every lunar cycle was marked by precisely positioned earthen monuments. Imagine standing atop Monk's Mound, the towering centerpiece of this ancient metropolis. Rising 100 feet above the surrounding plain and built from more than 20 million baskets of carefully selected soil, it remains the tallest prehistoric earthen structure in the Americas. From its summit, the view stretches for miles across what was once a bustling urban landscape, dotted with over 100 mounds, plazas, and ceremonial platforms, each positioned with mathematical precision to capture specific moments when earth and sky achieved perfect alignment. This was architecture as astronomy, engineering as prayer, urban planning as cosmic harmony. The genius of Cahokia's design becomes apparent when we understand how its builders used the landscape itself as an instrument of time. Near the central plaza stood a circle of wooden posts. Archaeologists call it woodhenge, arranged with such precision that they marked not only the solstices and at equinoxes, but the subtle variations in sunrise positions throughout the year. From the summit of Monk's Mound, priests or astronomers could watch the sun rise directly between specific posts. creating dramatic alignments that guided everything from agricultural cycles to religious ceremonies. But this was more than practical astronomy. The entire city was conceived as a microcosm of the universe, its layout reflecting celestial order, its rulers embodying divine harmony between earth and sky. The society that built Cahokia understood power not merely as political control, but as spiritual responsibility. The obligation to maintain cosmic balance through precise ritual observance of natural cycles. Archaeological evidence reveals a hierarchical society of remarkable sophistication. Elite burials contain elaborate offerings, marine shell beads arranged in bird effigies, copper plates depicting supernatural beings, and mica ornaments that may have symbolized celestial light. One burial, known as Mound 72, contained the remains of a ruler laid on a bed of thousands of shell beads arranged in the shape of a falcon, surrounded by the bodies of more than 250 retainers, evidence of ritual practices that speak to beliefs about death, rebirth, and the journey between worlds. Cahokia was also a nexus of continental trade that dwarfed even the impressive networks established by the earlier copper miners. Artifacts from across North America flowed through its plazas: obsidian from the Rocky Mountains, copper from the Great Lakes, shells from both the Gulf Coast and the Atlantic, chert from the Ozarks, and exotic materials from as far away as the Great Plains in the southeast. Traders and pilgrims arrived by river, their canoes laden with goods and stories from distant lands, transforming Cahokia into a cosmopolitan center where ideas, technologies, and spiritual practices merged and evolved. The city's influence spread throughout the Mississippi Valley and beyond, inspiring smaller but no less sophisticated settlements from Georgia to Oklahoma. Together, these sites formed what archaeologists call the Mississippian culture, a vast network of societies linked by common religious iconography, shared astronomical knowledge, and economic interdependence. The famous Birdman symbol, depicting a figure with outstretched wings and a falcon's head, appears on artifacts from Florida to Minnesota, suggesting a unified cosmology that transcended local political boundaries. Yet for all its magnificence, Cahokia's story contains an element of profound mystery. The same organizational genius that could coordinate the construction of massive earthworks, manage continental trade networks, and maintain precise astronomical observations also created something that proved ultimately unsustainable. The very success of the city may have contained the seeds of its own transformation. By the 1300s, this magnificent city had been abandoned. Its plazas fell silent, its temples decayed, and the forests slowly reclaimed its mounds. No written record explains why. Environmental studies suggest a convergence of catastrophic factors: prolonged droughts intensified by climate change, devastating floods that destroyed agricultural systems, deforestation that stripped the land of its ability to support such a large population, and perhaps social unrest as the complex web of hierarchy and belief that had sustained the city for centuries began to unravel. But there's something haunting in the archaeological evidence that suggests the abandonment wasn't simply pragmatic. It may have been spiritual. Some oral traditions among descendant tribes hint that Cahokia was both wondrous and dangerous, a place of such concentrated power that it eventually consumed itself. Whether this reflects actual memory or mythic interpretation, it captures a profound truth about the fragility of even the most sophisticated civilizations. Standing today among the grass-covered mounds that are all that remain of this once great metropolis, it's impossible not to feel the weight of impermanence. Here was a city that rivaled anything in the medieval world, a center of learning and trade and spiritual power that commanded respect across half a continent. Yet its creators built no walls of stone, left no texts, raised no armies. Only these gentle earthen monuments that speak of a different understanding of what makes a civilization truly great. And far to the west, in landscapes that seemed to forbid human habitation entirely, other ancient engineers were proving that ingenuity could flourish even in the most impossible conditions. As the story moves westward from the lush Mississippi Valley, the landscape transforms dramatically. Here, where the humid air gives To the sun-bleached basins of Arizona and the mysterious valleys of Southern California, we encounter perhaps the most remarkable engineering achievement in ancient America: the transformation of seemingly impossible desert landscapes into flourishing agricultural paradises. The Hohokam people, whose name comes from the O'odham word meaning those who have vanished, lived along the Gila and Salt rivers in what is now Arizona. Around 300 CE, these desert engineers began constructing something that defies easy comprehension: an intricate network of irrigation canals that would eventually span hundreds of miles, some individual channels stretching over 10 miles long and 20 feet wide, all carved through compact desert soil using nothing but stone tools and human labor. The precision required for this undertaking was absolutely staggering. Each canal had to maintain exactly the right slope, steep enough for water to flow steadily across vast distances, but gentle enough to prevent erosion that would destroy crops and settlements downstream. Too steep, and rushing water would carve destructive gullies through carefully tended fields. Too shallow, and the precious water would pool and stagnate, creating breeding grounds for disease while leaving distant communities to wither in drought. This was hydraulic engineering that wouldn't be matched in complexity and scale anywhere in North America until the modern era, achieved by people working centuries ahead of their time. By 1100 CE, the Hohokam world had become a thriving constellation of towns and villages, connected by trade routes that reached all the way to Mesoamerica. Archaeological excavations have uncovered macaw feathers, copper bells, and obsidian blades in Hohokam settlements, exotic materials that could only have come from Mexico or Central America. In return, they traded turquoise, shells, and cotton textiles, establishing commercial relationships that spanned thousands of miles and multiple cultures. But the Hohokam were not alone in their mastery of desert engineering. Farther north, in the spectacular cliff country of the Four Corners region, the ancestral Puebloans were creating their own marvels of adaptation and construction. Their dwellings at sites like Chaco Canyon and Mesa Verde rose in tiers against canyon walls, constructed from sandstone blocks fitted with such precision that even today, centuries later, the mortar lines remain razor-thin. Chaco Canyon, in particular, served as the Southwest's counterpart to Cahokia, a ceremonial metropolis that functioned simultaneously as a hub of trade and a cosmic calendar written in architecture. At its peak between 900 and 1150 CE, Chaco featured multi-story great houses connected by perfectly straight roads that radiated outward across the desert for dozens of miles. These roads were carved directly through cliffs and mesas with an engineering precision that suggests they served ceremonial rather than purely practical purposes. Highways built for processions of pilgrims rather than mere commerce. The layout of Chaco's structures, especially Pueblo Bonito, the largest and most complex of them all, reveals an obsession with celestial alignment that rivals anything achieved by ancient European astronomers. These buildings functioned as massive instruments of time, their walls and windows positioned to capture specific moments when earth and sky achieved perfect harmony. Light beams entering carefully calculated openings mark the turning points of the year, guiding both agricultural activities and religious ceremonies with mathematical precision. The famous Sundagger site exemplifies this sophisticated understanding of astronomical cycles. Atop Fajada Butte, a spiral petroglyph is illuminated by shifting shafts of sunlight that slice through gaps between three stone slabs. During the summer solstice, a dagger of light bisects the spiral perfectly. At the winter solstice, two light beams frame its edges. The precision required to achieve these effects, accounting for the sun's changing position throughout the year, demonstrates a level of scientific observation that challenges every assumption about the capabilities of pre-industrial societies. But perhaps the most mysterious expressions of this desert genius are the vast geoglyphs etched into the floors of California and the American Southwest. Near Blythe, along the Colorado River, hundreds of gigantic human and animal figures stretch across barren flats, visible only from the air. Known as the Blythe intaglios, these enormous ground drawings were created by scraping away dark surface stones to reveal lighter sand beneath, some figures extending for hundreds of feet across the desert floor. Similar patterns exist throughout Nevada, Oregon, and Arizona. Spirals, circles, and serpentine forms cut into the ground with the same mysterious precision. They echo the famous Nazca lines of Peru in their scale and enigmatic purpose. Yet many of the North American geoglyphs predate their South American counterparts by centuries. Were these coincidences of human creativity, or do they represent traces of some shared ancient impulse to transform the earth itself into a sacred canvas? The interpretation of these desert masterpieces remains contentious. Some archaeologists believe they represent clan symbols, visible markers for travelers along ancient trade routes. Others argue they were integral to ritual ceremonies, perhaps linked to fertility rites or cosmic cycles that required participants to view the earth from a divine perspective. Still others see them as memorials, ways of anchoring mythic stories permanently in the landscape, ensuring that sacred narratives would endure as long as the desert itself. By 1450 CE, the great canal networks of the Hohokam had fallen silent, their villages abandoned as prolonged droughts, and the onset of the Little Ice Age devastated agricultural systems that had flourished for over a millennium. Yet echoes of their genius persist. Modern irrigation systems in Phoenix and Tucson follow the exact same paths laid down by these ancient engineers over 1,000 years ago. Testament to an understanding of water, gravity, and landscape that transcended their era. But if these desert civilizations achieved technological mastery through adaptation to harsh environments, they were not the only ancient Americans to leave behind traces that challenge our understanding of the possible. As the known archaeological record pushes outward into ever more extraordinary territories, so too do the legends that seem to dance at the very edges of documented history. Not all evidence of ancient America lies buried beneath soil and sediment. Some of it lingers in story, in tales passed through generations that speak of beings taller than any ordinary human, of giant bones uncovered from hillsides, of vanished races whose memory seems older than time itself. In the 19th century, newspapers from coast to coast published breathless reports of giant skeletons unearthed from burial mounds, some allegedly standing 8 or 9 feet tall with bone structures that seemed to dwarf modern humans. To the settlers and amateur antiquarians of that era, these discoveries appeared to confirm their deepest suspicions, that an ancient and superior race had once ruled the continent before vanishing into myth and legend. Modern archaeologists approach these claims with appropriate scientific caution. Many of the newspaper accounts were clearly exaggerated, some outright fabrications fueled by frontier sensationalism and the era's fascination with the mysterious and extraordinary. Yet, as with so many legends that persist across cultures and centuries, the line between imagination and observation proves frustratingly difficult to draw. For among the hundreds of dubious reports and sensationalized stories, there remain a handful of accounts that resist easy dismissal. Descriptions of unusually large skeletal remains found in documented excavation sites, subsequently lost or misplaced in museum archives, leaving only tantalizing traces of what might have been. The fascination with ancient giants runs deeper than mere sensationalism. It touches something fundamental in human psychology. Nearly every indigenous tradition across North America contains stories of immense beings who shaped the land and lived before humankind as we know it. The Choctaw spoke of the Nahulo, pale-skinned giants who once hunted across the plains. The Paiute told of the Sitaka, red-haired cannibal giants driven into caves by their ancestors. The Iroquois recounted wars with towering beings who hurled stones and trees like weapons. To outsiders, these were merely myths, colorful folklore with no basis in historical reality. But to the people who carried these stories across generations, they represented fragments of a remembered world, cultural, memories encoded in narrative form and preserved through oral tradition with the same reverence given to any other aspect of tribal history. In 1911, miners excavating Batguano from Lovelock Cave in Nevada discovered artifacts that seemed to echo these ancient tales. Woven sandals over a foot long, bones of unusual size, and remnants of tools that suggested inhabitants of extraordinary stature. Some interpreted these findings as validation of Paiute legends about the Sitaka. Others saw only coincidence and wishful thinking. The human remains were eventually studied by anthropologists and found to fall within normal ranges of human variation, though at the upper limits. Yet the myth of the Lovelock giants endured, and even today, the cave remains a place of uneasy silence. Part of the allure of the giant narrative lies in its symbolic power. Giants embody the immensity of the unknown past, serving as metaphors for humanity's deep-seated desire to believe that what came before was larger, stranger, more profound than the present. They remind us that the Earth once belonged to forces beyond our current comprehension, beings whose very existence challenges the comfortable boundaries of accepted reality. For early European settlers who could not fathom how indigenous peoples had constructed the vast mounds and earthworks scattered across the Midwest, the idea of giants offered an explanation that fit their worldview, however false. The myth filled gaps in understanding with awe, providing a framework for processing achievements that seemed impossible given their assumptions about primitive societies. But there are other interpretations, ones more grounded in scientific possibility, yet no less mysterious. Some scholars suggest that the giant legends may have been inspired by encounters with fossilized bones of prehistoric megafauna. Mastodon skeletons, for example, were frequently mistaken for human remains in the 18th and 19th centuries. When fragments of massive femurs or skulls emerged from burial mounds, they could easily be interpreted as the evidence of enormous ancestors. Without modern paleontology to provide context, myth rushed in to fill the void. The bones of Ice Age elephants became the remains of giant warriors. The skulls of cave bears transformed into evidence of monstrous humanoids. In this light, the persistence of giant legends across cultures becomes less about actual encounters with oversized humans and more about the universal human tendency to mythologize the mysterious. Yet physical anomalies do exist in the archaeological record that cannot be easily dismissed. Skeletal variation among ancient populations could indeed produce individuals of extraordinary height, 7 feet or more, though still within the possible range of human diversity. Nutrition, genetics, and environmental factors could have contributed to the development of unusually tall individuals who, in death, became the stuff of legend. Some burial mounds have yielded skeletons significantly larger than average, their bones accompanied by elaborate grave goods that suggest these individuals held special status within their communities. Whether this status derived from their physical stature, their spiritual significance, or their roles as leaders and warriors remains a matter of speculation. But perhaps the truth lies not in bones at all, but in perspective. The giants of legend may symbolize something deeper, the vastness of ancient America itself, the feeling of standing before works of unknown peoples whose achievements dwarf our understanding. To gaze upon earthen mounds the size of hills, or canal systems that stretch for hundreds of miles, or cities aligned with celestial precision, is to feel genuinely small in the face of such monumental accomplishment. From that humility springs myth. The people who came later, unable to imagine how such feats were accomplished by ordinary humans, gave their creators enormous stature to match their extraordinary deeds. In this sense, the giants never truly disappeared. They live on as symbols of the magnitude of what remains unknown about humanity's deepest past. And speaking of the unknown, the legends of ancient giants pale beside an even more intriguing possibility. If myths of giants hint at visitors of superhuman stature, other mysteries speak of visitors from across the sea. Mariners who may have reached the shores of the Americas long before Columbus ever dreamed of sailing west. For centuries, whispers of such contact have surfaced and faded, dismissed by some as fantasy and defended by others as forgotten history. Yet scattered along coastlines and buried in trade goods, there exist fragments of evidence, small but persistent, that hint at ancient crossings of vast oceans. The question is as old as archaeology itself. Could early humans, even in prehistoric times, have possessed the skill and courage to traverse the open sea? We know that by the time of the Ice Age, humans had already reached Australia, an achievement requiring voyages across open water tens of thousands of years ago. If people could cross the treacherous waters between Southeast Asia and the Australian continent, why could they not have reached the New World by similar means? Some of the most intriguing evidence comes from the Pacific, along the west coast of South America. Archaeologists have discovered chicken bones at pre-Columbian sites, dating to around 1300 CE, centuries before any known European contact. DNA analysis of these bones revealed genetic similarities not to European chickens, but to Polynesian varieties. The Polynesians, renowned for their unmatched navigational skills, had already reached far-flung islands such as Easter Island, Hawaii, and New Zealand by that time period. Could their remarkable ocean-going canoes have ventured even farther still, eastward across the vast Pacific to the coast of South America? Other clues reinforce this tantalizing possibility. The sweet potato, a crop native to South America, was being cultivated in Polynesia long before any documented European contact. Linguistic studies reveal that the Polynesian word for sweet potato, kumara, closely resembles its Quechua equivalent, kumer. Whether this resemblance represents mere coincidence or proof of ancient exchange remains hotly debated, but it suggests at minimum some form of contact between these distant worlds. Some anthropologists have proposed that Polynesian sailors reached the coasts of Peru or Ecuador, traded goods and crops, then returned home carrying both material treasures and stories that would transform into legend. The technical capability certainly existed. Polynesian navigators routinely crossed thousands of miles of open ocean using nothing but stars, wave patterns, and bird flight paths to guide their journeys. But the Pacific represents only one frontier of possibility. Across the Atlantic, another set of mysteries unfolds with equal intrigue. Certain researchers have long speculated that seafarers from Africa or the Mediterranean might have reached the Americas in deep antiquity. Among these theories, the most controversial involve claims of Egyptian, Phoenician, or Carthaginian presence in the New World. Carthage, after all, possessed advanced shipbuilding techniques and maintained trade networks across the entire Mediterranean basin. Some fringe theorists argue that Carthaginian vessels could have followed currents westward, carried by the same trade winds that later brought Columbus across the ocean. Supporting evidence, however, remains frustratingly elusive. A handful of anomalous inscriptions, such as the so-called Paraíba stone in Brazil, allegedly bearing Phoenician writing, have been largely dismissed by mainstream archaeology as modern forgeries. Yet the persistence of such tales speaks to an undeniable fascination with the idea that ancient civilizations were far more connected than traditional history suggests. The sea, after all, connects rather than separates, and ocean currents flow in both directions. The notion that skilled mariners of the ancient world might have reached across vast waters appeals to a deep intuition that human curiosity and capability have always exceeded the boundaries we imagine. Then, there are the African voyages. Some historians point to cultural parallels between pre-Columbian societies and parts of West Africa, similarities in pyramid construction, agricultural terracing techniques, and certain mythological motifs. These resemblances, while compelling to the imagination, often crumble under rigorous analysis. But one figure keeps returning to scholarly discussion: Mansa Abu Bakr II of Mali. According to medieval chronicles, this emperor abdicated his throne in the early 14th century to lead an expedition across the Atlantic, seeking new lands beyond the western horizon. Some accounts describe him setting sail with hundreds of ships, never to return. Could some of his fleet have reached the Americas? While no archaeological evidence yet supports this possibility, oceanographic models confirm that West African currents could indeed carry vessels to the coasts of Brazil or the Caribbean. Far older hypotheses suggest contact not during recorded history, but during the depths of prehistory itself. The Solutrean hypothesis, for instance, proposes that Paleolithic peoples from Ice Age Europe may have crossed the North Atlantic along the edge of glacial ice, following seals and fish in small boats adapted for Arctic conditions. Proponents note intriguing similarities between Solutrean stone tools found in France and Clovis points discovered in North America, though critics argue that these resemblances are superficial and that the time gap between them, thousands of years, makes direct connection unlikely. Meanwhile, new genetic studies have added layers of complexity to these debates. Certain isolated DNA lineages in South American populations show faint traces resembling those of Australo-Melanesian peoples. Whether this reflects ancient migration, parallel evolution, or sampling error remains uncertain, but it challenges the simplicity of traditional migration narratives. The ancient art of navigation itself offers the most compelling evidence for these possibilities. Across the Pacific, traditional navigators routinely crossed thousands of miles of open ocean using only stars, wave patterns, and bird flights. On the other side of the world, Norse sailors had reached Greenland and Newfoundland by 1000 CE, as confirmed by archaeological sites in Canada. If such maritime achievements were possible in the medieval period, why not earlier? The question lingers like heat shimmer on the ocean surface. How many times did humanity find this continent before the world remembered it? How many voyages ended in silence, their traces scattered on distant shores like messages written in a language we have yet to learn to read? And perhaps some of those messages were written not in artifacts or genes, but in stone itself. If the ocean carried whispers of ancient contact, then the land itself holds the most enduring voice of all, the language of stone. Scattered across the Americas, from the dry canyons of the Southwest to the granite walls of the Great Plains and the basalt cliffs of South America, lie carvings that predate recorded history. Spirals, stars, serpents, and strange humanoid figures stretch across rock faces as though etched by memory itself. Speaking of an age when symbols were the only written word, when sky and stone served as the pages of a vast, unending story. These petroglyphs and pictographs, images pecked, carved, or painted onto stone surfaces, form a silent library of the ancient world. Some are 10,000 years old, others far younger, but their continuity across time and space is absolutely astonishing. The same shapes reappear across thousands of miles, concentric circles, handprints, animals in profile, and geometric lines that seem to mirror the patterns of constellations overhead. Modern archaeologists debate whether this similarity reflects cultural exchange across vast distances, or simply the universality of human perception when confronting the cosmos. Yet, as researchers decode these ancient markings using increasingly sophisticated techniques, patterns emerge that suggest something far more profound than coincidence, a shared understanding of time, space, and humanity's place within the cosmic order that transcends the boundaries of individual cultures or geographical regions. In the American Southwest, the Chacoans and their predecessors filled canyon walls with petroglyphs aligned to celestial events with mathematical precision that rivals modern astronomical instruments. At Fajada Butte near the famous Sundagger site, spirals carved into rock are illuminated by shafts of sunlight during solstices and equinoxes, creating dramatic light shows that mark the turning points of the year. Elsewhere in the canyon, handprints and zigzag lines trace the path of the Milky Way across the night sky with startling accuracy. These images were not mere decoration or artistic expression. They were calculation, a cosmic ledger of light and season carved permanently into the living rock. They reveal how ancient peoples synchronized their lives with the heavens, not through written calendars or mechanical clocks, but through geometry and light itself, transforming the landscape into a vast astronomical instrument. Further north in Wyoming and Montana, rock carvings depict animals and star clusters, including what some researchers interpret as representations of the Pleiades constellation. Similar motifs appear in the desert basins of Nevada and California, carved by ancestors who tracked the night sky long before telescopes or magnetic compasses existed, using only their eyes and accumulated generations of careful observation. On the plains of Alberta and Saskatchewan, stone circles known as medicine wheels mark solar and stellar alignments with astonishing precision that continues to amaze modern astronomers. The Bighorn medicine wheel, perched high in the mountains of Wyoming, features stone spokes that line up with the summer solstice sunrise and the rising points of major stars like Aldebaran and Sirius. Such structures built by indigenous peoples thousands of years ago served simultaneously as sacred spaces and astronomical observatories, demonstrating that ancient builders possessed not only keen observational skills but a sophisticated cosmological philosophy that viewed the stars not as distant objects, but as integral parts of the same cycles that govern rivers, seasons, and life itself. In the southeastern United States, earthworks and petroglyphs intertwine in ways that suggest continent-wide astronomical traditions. Some mound complexes, when viewed from above, resemble star patterns, an earthly mirror of the sky that allowed ancient peoples to walk among the constellations. Recent studies using LiDAR imaging have revealed precise alignments between mound positions and celestial events, with linear earthworks pointing toward solstitial sunrises and circular formations tracking lunar standstills that occur only once every 18 years. The same astronomical precision that guided Cahokia's Stonhenge seems to echo across vast distances, appearing in sites far from the Mississippi heartland. Across the continent, similar expressions emerge independently, as though different cultures were responding to the same cosmic call, driven by an irresistible impulse to encode the movements of heaven into permanent earthly monuments. In the Pacific Northwest, intricate carvings of faces and eyes stare from stone surfaces, surrounded by spiral motifs that may symbolize the movement of water or celestial paths. In the American Midwest, a vast limestone tablet known as the Davenport Stela bears mysterious engravings, geometric lines, and anthropomorphic figures that have fueled centuries of speculation about their origins and meaning. Moving south into Mesoamerica and the Andes, the continuity becomes even more striking. The Nazca lines of Peru, etched into the desert between 500 BCE and 500 CE, form vast geoglyphs of animals and geometric forms visible only from the air. Scholars believe they served ritual or astronomical purposes, perhaps marking underground water sources or celestial cycles that governed agricultural and ceremonial life. But not all petroglyphs are cosmic in scope. Some depict human hands reaching out from the past like signatures in stone, personal expressions that remind us these were not abstract symbols, but intimate records of presence and belonging. In caves throughout Baja California, towering red and black figures stretch across ceilings, stylized humans and animals painted thousands of years ago with pigments made from hematite and charcoal that still cling to rock, like memories of a vanished world. These engravings, circles, and alignments remind us that the Americas were not silent lands awaiting discovery, but territories alive with meaning, where civilizations observed, measured, and recorded the cosmos long before telescopes and written calendars existed. They left behind not ruins, but relationships, connections between humans and universe, physical and spiritual, transient and eternal. And as we stand at the threshold of understanding these ancient messages, we find ourselves confronting the ultimate question about America's deepest past. At the end of this long journey through ice and soil, mound and desert, myth and stone, one profound question remains: how old is civilization in the Americas? Really? Each discovery, each anomaly, each whisper from the ground suggests that the story we have inherited is fundamentally incomplete. The continents we have long called the New World are, in truth, among humanity's oldest, places where civilizations flourished, adapted, and evolved across timescales that dwarf our previous understanding. For centuries, the prevailing narrative placed American history in the shadow of the Old World, as if time itself began elsewhere and only gradually spread westward. Mesopotamia, Egypt, and China were celebrated as the cradles of complexity, while the Americas were portrayed as late bloomers, continents that remained empty until relatively recent times, then developed in isolation from the great currents of human achievement. But the land remembers differently. Archaeology, for all its precision and scientific rigor, is ultimately an art of fragments. Every trowel of dirt uncovers both knowledge and uncertainty. Each radiocarbon date raises new questions even as it answers old ones. Beneath layers of sediment lie traces of people who built with earth instead of stone, who charted the sky with eyes instead of instruments, whose languages left no alphabets, but survived in rhythm, myth, and geometric design carved into living rock. The more we learn about these ancient Americans, the more the arbitrary boundary between primitive and civilized dissolves into meaninglessness. It is tempting to think of civilization as beginning with cities, great metropolises like Memphis or Athens, with their stone temples and written laws. But what if our very definition of civilization needs fundamental rethinking? In the Americas, the evidence points not to sudden urban explosions, but to a gradual flowering across millennia. A series of interwoven experiments in living, each perfectly adapted to its unique landscape and climate. The mound builders of the Mississippi Valley, the desert engineers of the Hohokam, the astronomers of Chaco Canyon, the copper miners of Lake Superior, the mariners who perhaps followed kelp forests along the Pacific coast, each represented a civilization in its own right, distinct yet connected by common impulses to understand the world and find order within apparent chaos. Modern science is finally beginning to merge with ancient wisdom, creating a new picture that is humbler, more complex, and infinitely more human than anything we previously imagined. Satellite mapping and LiDAR imaging have revealed hundreds of previously unknown sites buried beneath jungle canopies and prairie soil. In the Amazon basin alone, archaeologists have uncovered outlines of vast settlements, roads, plazas, and earthen pyramids once hidden beneath rainforest growth. Some dating back 2,000 years, others even older. Each discovery lengthens the timeline, forcing scholars to confront what once seemed impossible. That civilization in the Americas may have arisen not millennia after the Old World, but nearly alongside it. If the story of ancient America is one of forgotten greatness, it is also fundamentally a story of resilience. When climates changed, when rivers shifted course, when droughts and floods erased entire cities, people adapted. The descendants of the mound builders, the Hohokam, and the Chacoans did not simply vanish into archaeological obscurity. They evolved, carrying forward traditions, languages, and cosmological understanding that survive today in indigenous nations across the continent. The Hopi, the Zuni, the Lakota, the Choctaw, all carry memories of cycles of creation and destruction, of migrations guided by stars and spirits, of sacred relationships between earth and sky that echo the astronomical precision of their ancestors' monuments. To them, the ancient sites are not ruins but living ancestors, their oral histories serving as repositories of environmental and historical knowledge, often more accurate than the colonial records. One striking example comes from the Pacific Northwest, where for generations local tribes told stories of great floods that reshaped the landscape. Scientists once dismissed these as allegory, until geological research in the 20th century revealed the cataclysmic Missoula floods, which swept across the region at the end of the last ice age exactly as those ancient stories described. Again and again, oral tradition proves to be not fantasy, but encoded memory, carrying truths across millennia in the only way the human mind could preserve them without writing. Through the power of story itself, perhaps that is the real treasure of ancient America, not the artifacts themselves, but the continuity of memory. The same impulse that drove early peoples to carve spirals into rock, to align mounds with solstices, or to trace constellations in desert sand, lives on in those who still walk this land today. History, after all, is not a straight line but a spiral, ever returning to the same fundamental truths under new light. The Americas were not isolated worlds waiting to be discovered. They were vibrant centers of innovation, spirituality, and exchange. Their people were astronomers and engineers, traders and storytellers. They charted the heavens, built cities aligned with stars, and mined the earth with skills unmatched for their time. The fact that much of their legacy was buried, drowned, or erased by colonial history does not diminish its significance. It only deepens the mystery of what remains unseen. Today, researchers use drones, LiDAR, and underwater sonar to peer beneath jungles and seas. Each scan reveals something unexpected: roads stretching for miles under Amazonian forests, geometrical mounds beneath Louisiana wetlands, submerged terraces off distant coasts. These are not isolated finds, but fragments of a continent-sized story, a hidden architecture of human ingenuity stretching back tens of thousands of years. As this tale draws to a close, imagine standing at twilight beside an ancient mound, canyon, or wind-carved petroglyph. The air is still, the sky deep with stars. Somewhere beneath your feet, the pulse of the past continues, steady and unbroken, reminding us that in the quiet of the ancient earth, nothing is ever truly lost. Good night.